There's a unique kind of silence that appears when a younger woman looks at an older man for a moment, slightly longer than necessary. Not some dramatic movie scene, not an obvious signal, just a small pause long enough to make you question whether you actually noticed it or simply imagined it. And because you've trained yourself not to assume too much, you quietly explain it away. She's just being friendly. She probably acts this way with everyone. It doesn't have to mean anything. Most men rarely admit how quickly they dismiss the idea that someone younger could genuinely see something valuable in them, not because they lack confidence every single day, but because over time they've taught themselves not to expect too much from certain situations. If this conversation already feels familiar, stay with me. Subscribe if you enjoy these thoughtful discussions about relationships, emotions, and human psychology. There are certain things people almost never say out loud, yet hearing them can completely change the way we understand ourselves. Age does something fascinating. It doesn't only transform your appearance, it also changes the way you view possibilities. When you're 25, rejection often feels temporary. It feels like something you can move past. But when you're 45 or 50, sometimes rejection begins to feel like a permanent pattern, almost like a rule you have accepted without realizing it. So, when a younger woman smiles at you in a slightly different way, when she remembers a small detail you mentioned weeks ago, when she seems unusually comfortable around you, your first reaction often isn't excitement, it's uncertainty. And that uncertainty causes many men to overlook what may actually be happening. Not because every younger woman is interested, she isn't, but because genuine interest rarely arrives in a loud and obvious way. More often, it appears quietly, carefully, almost like it's waiting to see if you notice. I've seen this happen countless times. A man assumes she's simply being polite. Meanwhile, everyone else around him has already noticed that she gives him a little more attention than she gives others. Not through dramatic gestures, not through obvious flirting, through small details, the kind of details that disappear if you're only searching for clear and undeniable signs. She laughs, but first she looks to see whether you're laughing too. You're telling a story in a group conversation. Other people interrupt, but she waits. She wants to hear how your story finishes. It sounds insignificant because it is such a small thing. Yet attention is one of the most valuable emotional gifts people give each other. We live in a world where everyone is constantly distracted. Phones are buzzing, eyes are moving around the room, and conversations often end before they truly begin. So, when someone chooses to stay mentally present with you, when they choose to actually listen even though they don't have to, that isn't meaningless. And here's something many people misunderstand. A lot of younger women aren't attracted to an older man because he is trying desperately to appear younger. Sometimes the opposite is true. They become interested in the moments when he stops trying to prove himself. There is a certain calmness, a certain stability, not perfection, not endless confidence, just less noise. She notices that you don't interrupt people every few seconds. You don't compete for attention. You don't appear desperate to be accepted by everyone around you. Ironically, the things you stopped doing years ago because life taught you humility are sometimes the exact things she notices first. But don't move too quickly, because this is where many men misunderstand the situation. Kindness is not the same as attraction. Respect is not always attraction. Comfort is not automatically attraction. Human connections are much more complex than that. Someone can genuinely enjoy your presence without wanting a romantic relationship. Understanding that difference matters, because real confidence becomes stronger when it is not built on imagination. Still, there is one behavior that quietly separates normal friendliness from something that often shows deeper emotional curiosity. It happens before compliments, before flirting, before almost everything else. She begins looking for reasons to remain connected to your world. Not because she has to, because she wants another conversation, another opportunity to interact, another few extra minutes with you. Think about how uncommon that actually is. Most adults are constantly trying to move from one conversation to the next. They are checking the time, thinking about responsibilities, planning their evening, or mentally preparing for whatever comes after. So when someone continues a conversation that naturally could have ended several minutes ago, something deserves your attention. Not certainty, attention. She asks another question after the first one has already been answered. Then she asks another. She walks away and later finds a reason to return. She remembers something unfinished and comes back to continue the conversation. It is subtle, almost invisible, unless you understand what you are looking for. And surprisingly, this is not even the sign that catches my attention the most. The next one is much quieter. Most men completely miss it because they focus on what she says instead of noticing what happens in the silence between them. Silence makes many people uncomfortable. Watch two people who barely know each other stand together without speaking for more than a few seconds. Usually, one person immediately reaches for their phone, looks around the room, clears their throat, or says something random just to break the quiet. People often rush to fill empty space because silence can feel revealing. But something different happens when two people feel emotionally comfortable with each other. The silence remains, not because they have nothing to say, but because neither person feels pressured to perform. And this is one of those moments many men overlook. A younger woman might be talking with her friends, laughing, moving around the room naturally. But when she finds herself standing beside you, something changes. The pace slows. The energy becomes calmer. She doesn't appear desperate to impress you. She isn't searching for the perfect thing to say. She simply stays. Maybe you're both looking outside at the rain through a cafe window. Maybe you're standing at a professional event after everyone else has moved into smaller groups. Maybe you're walking toward the parking area after a gathering has ended. Nothing extraordinary is happening on the surface, but she doesn't seem eager to escape the quiet moment. Now, that alone does not automatically mean attraction. Some people are simply comfortable around certain personalities. Still, when emotional interest begins developing, comfort often arrives before flirting ever does. It is a strange order. Movies usually teach us that attraction begins with dramatic moments, intense chemistry, or instant sparks. Real life is often much softer. Two people repeatedly finding themselves in the same conversations. A few extra seconds of eye contact. An unexpected feeling of ease. Then, curiosity slowly begins doing its work. She starts wondering what you think. Not because you are intentionally trying to be mysterious, but because you are not constantly explaining yourself. Older men often underestimate the value of this. When you have experienced enough disappointment, enough success, enough mistakes, something usually changes. You stop talking just to fill every empty moment. You answer honestly. Then you allow the conversation to breathe. And strangely enough, that breathing room often gives another person the opportunity to come closer. There is another detail I have noticed. It is not only what she says, it is what she asks. Pay attention to the difference. Someone making simple, polite conversation usually asks about basic information. What do you do? Where are you from? How long have you worked here? These questions are normal. They do not necessarily reveal anything beyond simple friendliness. But emotional curiosity sounds different. What made you choose that path? Were you always like this? What was that experience really like for you? Now, she is not simply collecting facts. She is trying to understand the person behind those facts. That change matters. Because attraction often begins with fascination before it becomes romance. She wants to know the story beneath the story. And without even realizing it, you begin sharing parts of yourself that you normally keep private. Not necessarily deep secrets, just pieces of who you are. The reason you changed careers. Why you enjoy spending time alone sometimes. The lesson you learned from a mistake you made years ago. You finish explaining something, and instead of quickly changing the subject, she stays with it. Almost as if she is trying to imagine the younger version of you who lived through those experiences. Many men assume women only notice appearance first. And yes, appearance can matter. Everyone is human. But many women also pay attention to emotional consistency, especially after life has taught them how exhausting, unpredictable people can become. An older man who listens carefully, keeps his promises, and can laugh without needing to control every conversation can become surprisingly attractive. Not simply because he is older, but because of what those years have shaped inside him. Of course, age alone does not automatically create maturity. Time only gives people opportunities to grow. Some people use those years to become wiser, calmer, and more understanding. Others simply collect years without changing much at all. That is why confidence can never come only from getting older. It comes from becoming someone whose presence feels safe, balanced, and peaceful. And there is one moment that often reveals whether she experiences you in that way. It is so ordinary that most people completely miss it. She begins sharing small pieces of her life that nobody specifically asked about. A funny memory from her childhood, something embarrassing that happened earlier that day, a random thought she had while driving home. None of these things seem important at first. But then you realize something. People usually do not share random details with someone who feels emotionally distant. Those small stories are invitations, not promises, invitations. She is quietly communicating, "I want you to understand what my world looks like. And if you pay close attention, you may notice something else beginning to change." Not necessarily the way she speaks to you, the way she looks at you, especially during moments when you are not looking back. There is a certain look people have when they are simply seeing you. And then there is another kind of look, the one that happens when they are quietly observing you, trying to understand you. Most of the time, you never catch it, because the moment you turn your head, it is already gone, not because she is afraid, not because she is trying to hide something. It is simply replaced by a normal expression. A younger woman who is becoming emotionally interested does not always stare. In fact, many women will avoid doing that, especially if they are naturally reserved or uncertain about how you might respond. Instead, she watches in small moments. When you are talking to someone else, when you are focused on your coffee, when you are helping another person without expecting praise. Those are the moments when she sees who you are, when you are not trying to impress anyone. And that matters, because attraction is not always created during a conversation. Sometimes it grows while one person is quietly watching the other. I remember a man once telling me, "Every time I looked up, she had already looked away." He laughed when he said it. He assumed he was probably imagining things. And maybe, sometimes, we do create patterns in our minds because we hope they exist. But a few weeks later, another person mentioned the same woman. "You know she watches you whenever you're not paying attention, right?" He had no idea, not because he lacked awareness, but because he never believed he was someone worth watching. That sentence stayed with me, not because of the woman, because of him. How many men walk through life believing they are invisible? More than most people realize. Not loudly, quietly. They stop expecting genuine interest. So when it finally appears, they explain it away before it even has a chance to become something meaningful. And this does not only happen in romantic situations, it happens everywhere. Someone compliments your work. You call it luck. Someone enjoys having conversations with you. You assume they are just being polite. Someone remembers something personal you shared. You convince yourself they probably remember everyone's stories. Do you see the pattern? Sometimes the hardest person to convince that you are interesting is yourself. Now, this does not mean every glance has romantic meaning. People look at each other for many different reasons: curiosity, kindness, simple coincidence. That is why it is dangerous to create an entire story from one single moment. But when small signs begin appearing together, the longer conversations, the comfortable silence, the personal questions, the small stories she chooses to share, the repeated moments of attention. Now, you are no longer looking at one isolated clue. You are noticing a pattern, and human emotions usually reveal themselves this way, quietly, slowly, one small piece at a time. There is another behavior that can reveal a lot. Pay attention to what happens when you make other people laugh. Not her, other people. Maybe you tell a story. Maybe you make a simple joke that unexpectedly makes everyone smile. The room reacts. And in that brief moment, many people instinctively look toward the person they feel emotionally connected to. It is a natural human response. We often want to share emotional moments with someone who matters to us. You may notice her eyes finding yours for just a second, almost as if she wants to know whether you enjoyed that moment too. Again, one moment alone does not prove anything. But repeated moments begin creating a picture, and then something even quieter starts happening. She begins noticing changes in you. You trim your beard, and she notices. You seem tired one afternoon, and she asks if everything is okay. You mentioned weeks ago that you enjoy a particular author, and months later she brings it up again. That level of attention is rarely meaningless. Attention leaves traces. People remember what carries emotional importance, not because they force themselves to remember, because their mind quietly decides that this person matters enough to save those details. That is one of the most beautiful parts of human connection. We become historians of the people we care about, collecting small details without even realizing we are collecting them. And yet, there is still one mistake many older men make at exactly this stage, a mistake that can quietly push away a genuine connection before it ever gets the chance to develop. Ironically, it does not come from arrogance, it comes from fear. And once you recognize it, you begin noticing it everywhere. Fear has a strange ability to disguise itself as wisdom. It sounds logical. It feels protective. It says, "Don't embarrass yourself. She is probably just being friendly. You are reading too much into this." And sometimes that voice is correct. Sometimes it protects you from creating a story that was never really there. But there are also moments when that voice becomes so loud that it completely blocks out reality. I have spoken with men who can recognize attraction in someone else's life almost instantly. A friend tells them a story, and they immediately respond, "She is definitely interested." They can see the signs clearly when they are looking from the outside, but when those exact same behaviors happen to them, everything changes. Suddenly, every glance has another explanation, every question has another reason. Every effort becomes something that probably means nothing. It is almost as if accepting that someone could actually be interested in them feels more risky than convincing themselves that nobody is. Because if you never believe it could be real, you never have to face the possibility of finding out. That kind of self-protection makes sense. Life creates it. A painful breakup, a relationship that slowly fell apart, years of feeling ignored or unnoticed. Those experiences leave marks on the way we interpret new people. So when a younger woman begins making space for you in her life, your mind may immediately start searching for reasons why it cannot possibly mean anything. Not because you are a negative person, but because disappointment has a long memory. And here is where something subtle often happens. She notices your hesitation, not necessarily your words, your hesitation. Maybe she approaches you to start a conversation, and you end it earlier than you needed to. Maybe she asks about your weekend, and instead of sharing honestly, you give a short and polite answer. Maybe she laughs and seems like she wants to continue talking, but you leave first, not because you dislike being around her, but because you do not want to assume too much. From your perspective, you are simply trying to be respectful. But from her perspective, she may quietly wonder if you are not interested at all. This is where many possible connections disappear without either person doing anything wrong. No dramatic rejection, no argument, no painful conversation. Just two people protecting themselves at the exact same time. She is trying not to appear too obvious. You are trying not to misunderstand her. And somewhere in between those two fears, silence takes over. That is why emotional maturity is not about becoming fearless. Almost nobody becomes completely fearless. It is about becoming honest enough to stay present, even when certainty is unavailable. You do not need to force anything. You do not need perfect words. You do not need carefully planned strategies or calculated moves. Many times, what creates attraction is not flawless confidence, it is emotional stability. The ability to enjoy someone's presence without constantly trying to control the final outcome. Think about how different that feels. Instead of repeatedly asking yourself, "Does she like me?" a different question begins to appear. How do I feel when I am around her? Do you feel comfortable? Do you feel curious? Do you feel like you can simply be yourself? Or are you constantly performing, trying to become someone you think she would prefer? That question changes everything, because real connection is not created by convincing someone to choose you. It is created when two people feel comfortable enough to show up as they truly are.